Clowns, buffoons, fools, jesters, jokers, and every other kind of comic performer have been part of nearly every civilization throughout history. The comic actors of the Roman Empire were probably the direct ancestors of the medieval jester. Even though there weren't professional jesters during that time, those performers likely laid the foundation for both the style of comedy and the colorful clothing that later became associated with jesters. Several Roman emperors eventually drove actors out of the empire, believing they encouraged disrespect toward society. As those entertainers escaped persecution, they carried their craft across Europe, which may have helped shape the development of the medieval jester. At the same time, it's important to remember that similar figures already existed in other parts of the world, including China and India. The desire to laugh and be entertained has always been universal. During the Middle Ages, the luckiest jesters were the ones hired by nobles or members of the royal court. Their job involved much more than simply entertaining people. They became part of the social life of the region, and court jesters often enjoyed privileges that few others could claim. So let's step back in time and explore what life was really like for a medieval jester. Welcome to Medieval Madness. The minstrel, from the 12th through the 17th century. The word minstrel, meaning little servant or glee man, referred to anyone who earned a living as an entertainer. That included acrobats, jugglers, storytellers, and, most commonly, musicians. Many minstrels spent their lives traveling from one town or village to another, staying wherever business was good before moving on. The most talented and respected among them were fortunate enough to find permanent positions in royal courts or wealthy households where they could earn impressive wages. Minstrels could be found all across Europe, although they went by different names depending on the region. In France, they were called jongleurs or troubadours. In Germany, they were known as minnesingers. England had its scopes, Scandinavia had skalds, and Ireland had bards. As they traveled, these entertainers did more than perform songs and tell stories. They also helped spread news from place to place. Villagers would share local events and information with a minstrel, who would then pass those stories along to the people in the next town where they performed. Born this way. During the Middle Ages, a person's place in society was usually determined by the family they were born into. A blacksmith trained his sons to become blacksmiths. A stonemason passed his trade on to his children. Peasants generally remained in the lowest social class for their entire lives. Jesters, however, could come from almost any background. One might have been a clumsy clerk whose constant mishaps amused a noble. Another could have been a poor cottager famous for quick wit and clever jokes. Some were even former monks who had been expelled from their abbeys because of their outrageous behavior. Being a jester wasn't an easy job. It demanded intelligence, sharp thinking, and the ability to react quickly. A great memory was essential for remembering epic poems, heroic tales, and even the latest news that had to be carried from one village to another. A good jester also had to know how to adjust to different audiences. Children wanted gentle songs and simple entertainment, while older listeners usually preferred exciting stories about bloody battles and great wars. Knowing when to perform and when to quietly disappear into the background was another important skill. Although jesters were given remarkable freedom to speak their minds, they still had to be careful. They could say things that others couldn't, but if they offended too many people or pushed a joke too far, the consequences could be serious. There were two main types of fools: natural fools and artificial, or licensed fools. People with physical differences, including misshapen limbs, hunchbacks, unusually unattractive faces, or dwarfism, were often considered especially valuable because they could use their appearance to get extra laughs. Stories tell of natural fools being taken from poor families because many people believed they had been touched by God. For peasant families, caring for a disabled child or adult could be an overwhelming financial burden, so having that person accepted into a wealthy household was often seen as a great relief. These fools usually received no wages. Instead, they were given clothing, a place to sleep, and regular meals. But once they were no longer considered entertaining, they were often turned out of the household. Some survived by receiving charity, but many sadly spent the rest of their lives begging. Political influence and traditional costume. Having the king's ear. The tradition of keeping a fool at court goes back long before the Middle Ages. Their purpose wasn't limited to entertaining the king and his nobles. They also helped relieve the mental strain of ruling, allowing their patrons to clear their minds and focus more effectively on political matters and the responsibilities of government. By the end of the 12th century, the word fool was commonly used to describe a jester who had been rewarded with land instead of simple wages. These favored entertainers were also granted the freedom to leave the court, as long as they agreed to return whenever they were summoned. Throughout the medieval period, court jesters held respected positions, especially within royal households. Their unique role gave them the rare privilege of joking with their rulers without causing serious offense. They could deliver uncomfortable truths to kings and nobles by disguising them as humor, a practice known as the jester's privilege. While people laughed at the fool's jokes and antics, those performances often carried a great deal of wisdom and common sense beneath the surface. It was a demanding role that required intelligence, good judgment, and plenty of discretion. One famous example comes from France in 1340. After Edward III of England defeated the fleet of King Philip VI at the Battle of Sluys, no one wanted to be the one to tell the king the terrible news. That responsibility eventually fell to Philip's fool. When he appeared before the king, the fool quietly muttered, "Those cowardly Englishmen, those chicken-hearted cowards." "How so?" the king asked. "Because they didn't have the courage to jump into the sea like your own sailors did. Your men leaped from their ships and abandoned them to the enemy, while the English were too frightened to follow them." Royal courts were often ruled by fear and flattery, so the truth usually had to be wrapped in humor before anyone would accept it. It's impossible to know how many foolish ideas a jester quietly talked a king out of, or how many disasters may have happened because a ruler listened to poor advice instead. The motley medieval jester needed far more than a good sense of humor. Singing, dancing, juggling, acrobatics, and playing musical instruments were all essential skills. Many also performed ventriloquism, puppet shows, and sleight-of-hand tricks. Even while carrying out their main duty, making their patron laugh, they relied heavily on their appearance as part of the performance. The jester's traditional costume was designed to be amusing in its own right. During the early Middle Ages, it wasn't unusual for a fool to shave their head completely. They would then wear a hat topped with donkey ears, and some even attached a donkey's tail to complete the look. Later, many began wearing a hood similar to a monk's cowl that draped over the shoulders, giving them an intentionally ridiculous appearance. The hood was often decorated with a rooster's comb, known as a coxcomb, which became a traditional feature of a fool's headwear. By the late Middle Ages, the hat had evolved into the version most people recognize today. Made from soft cloth, it featured three pointed tips that symbolized the donkey ears of earlier designs. Small bells hung from the end of each point, creating the familiar cap and bells that jingled as the jester moved. Many jesters also carried a mock scepter called a bauble, or marotte. It usually had a small carved head on top with a wide grin, often made to resemble the jester themselves, complete with its own tiny cap and bells. Other props included fake weapons such as wooden swords, inflated animal bladders attached to sticks and filled with peas to create loud rattles, or padded clubs. These playful accessories added even more comedy to the jester's performance. Their clothing, known as motley, usually consisted of a brightly colored coat or tunic made from mismatched combinations like red and green or blue and yellow. The uneven patterns emphasized the fool's chaotic, unpredictable nature. Many outfits also had bells sewn onto the sleeves or around the hem so the jester could be heard jingling wherever they went. Tight-fitting, two-colored breeches and stockings completed the outfit. In most cases, the jester designed the costume personally and was responsible for keeping it in good condition. Natural fools, on the other hand, were typically dressed much more simply in long gowns. 3. Warfare, danger, and historic figures don't shoot the messenger. Serving as a messenger was also part of the job for a king's or nobleman's personal jester. They often accompanied their master into battle and carried messages to the opposing army, including offers of surrender or the terms for releasing hostages. Jesters were traditionally considered sacred, and custom dictated that no one should harm them. In reality, though, that protection didn't always hold up. If they delivered a message the enemy didn't want to hear, the fool was often the one who paid the price. It wasn't uncommon for an angry commander to literally shoot the messenger back toward the opposing army. The unfortunate jester might be loaded into a catapult or trebuchet and launched back across the battlefield. Ideally, the fool had already been killed, and only their severed head was sent flying. Sadly, there were times when the victim was still alive when they were hurled through the air. Notable jesters, one minstrel proved he was much more than an ordinary jester. His name was Taillefer, a Norman dwarf and French jongleur who crossed the English Channel with William the Conqueror during the Norman invasion. As the Battle of Hastings wore on, the Norman forces began to tire and faced the possibility of defeat. Riding on horseback, Taillefer entertained the troops by juggling a sword while singing the Song of Roland in front of the English lines. His performance drew the attention of one English soldier, who stepped out of the protection of the shield wall. Taillefer immediately seized the opportunity, attacked the man, and cut off his head. He then charged into the English ranks, killing several more enemies before he was finally overwhelmed. Taillefer is credited with raising the morale of the Norman army, helping them rally to victory at Hastings and ultimately secure the Kingdom of England. He wasn't the only famous jester, though. Many fools gained considerable influence and held respected positions throughout medieval society. Roland the Farter served as court jester to King Henry II of England during the 12th century. Although he was an accomplished flutist, he became famous for his unusual talent for breaking wind. He was especially popular during King Henry's Christmas celebrations, where his signature performance combined a fart, a whistle, and a jump, all at the same time. The king valued Roland so highly that he rewarded him with the 30-acre Hemmingstone Manor, along with an annual payment. At the court of Edward I, better known as Longshanks, Tom the Fool earned the remarkable sum of 50 shillings after giving an outstanding performance at the wedding of Princess Elizabeth. Many other jesters also benefited from their privileged positions. They used their influence to build wealth and secure profitable opportunities for friends and family. Another well-known figure was Rahere, who was determined to make the most of his talents. His sharp wit made him a favorite among the nobility, and he was commonly described as a minstrel. Rahere excelled at mocking people and spreading outrageous gossip behind their backs, entertaining everyone who listened. Along with performing clerical duties, he became the court jester to King Henry I in the early 1100s. Rahere would sometimes deliberately act like a fool, a performance that delighted both the servants and the children at court. According to tradition, he became seriously ill while on a pilgrimage to Rome, where he experienced a vision of Saint Bartholomew. After returning to London, he founded St. Bartholomew's Hospital, creating a place of refuge for people who were less fortunate. In 10th century China, Shen Jiangao, also known as gradually stretching taller, served as a court jester in the state of southern Tang. His influence was so great that he persuaded Emperor Li Bian to reduce taxes during a severe drought. Shen joked that even the rain was afraid of being taxed, which was why it refused to fall on the land. The emperor found the remark so amusing that he immediately lowered the taxes. According to legend, it rained that very night. Shen is also said to have saved the emperor's life. During a banquet, Li Bian invited one of his enemies to join him. The guest secretly poisoned a cup of wine before offering it to the emperor for a toast. Shen quickly grabbed the cup and, sacrificing himself to protect his ruler, drank the poisoned wine instead. Although he was given an antidote, Shen sadly died after suffering a burst brain. In Saxony, Germany, another famous figure stood apart from the typical image of a clown. Klaus Narr, who lived during the late 15th century, was widely regarded as a wise man rather than simply a fool. He became well known for his moral tales and parables, and some people even believed he had the ability to predict the future. Female fools and cultural legacy. Here come the girls. During the Middle Ages, women had very few rights and were generally considered the property of either their fathers or their husbands. Even so, a number of women found success as court jesters. For them, the role offered a rare opportunity to criticize powerful men without fear of punishment. It was one of the few professions that welcomed women on equal terms with men, allowing them to enjoy the same privileges without social stigma. Many female jesters served queens and noble women. One example was Archier-Wood de Poix, who was the fool to Jeanne, the queen of Charles VI of France in 1373. Records show that Queen Jeanne spent the impressive sum of 170 gold francs on a dress for Archier-Wood, suggesting that she was well cared for. Another well-known female jester was Madame d'Or, who entertained guests at the Festival of the Golden Fleece in Bruges, Belgium, in 1429. Margaret, the granddaughter of Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, also kept a female fool. She was even allowed to ride in a chariot alongside the ladies-in-waiting whenever she traveled with her mistress. One unnamed female jester appeared at the court of King Edward II during the Whitsuntide celebrations held at Westminster Hall in 1316. She rode into the hall on horseback, circled the room while entertaining the king and his distinguished guests with jokes, and then approached Edward at the end of her performance. Before leaving, she placed a letter into the king's hand and gracefully rode away. The letter turned out to be a petition criticizing the king for showing excessive favor to people who didn't deserve it while neglecting his loyal knights and faithful servants. No one else would likely have dared deliver such a message directly to the king, but jesters enjoyed unrestricted access throughout the court. It's also possible that this clever performer knew about Edward II's fondness for jesters who could ride horses, or, more accurately, fall off them. On one occasion, he rewarded a fool who repeatedly tumbled from his horse with the generous payment of 20 shillings, twice as much as another jester who entertained him only by dancing. The Lord of Misrule. Many Christmas traditions we still enjoy today can be traced back to the Middle Ages and even earlier. Singing carols, exchanging gifts, decorating homes, and indulging in large holiday feasts were all part of medieval Christmas celebrations. Within noble households and at the royal court, the position of Lord of Misrule was highly respected, and the jester was often chosen to fill that role during the holiday season. It was far from an easy assignment. The Lord of Misrule was responsible for organizing the festivities and making sure everything ran smoothly. Depending on the household, this period of celebration could last anywhere from 12 days to as long as 3 months. Masked celebrations, the procession of the Yule log, and lavish feasts all had to be carefully planned. The festivities sometimes included mummers' plays, a tradition that predates the Middle Ages and was practiced throughout Europe and into Russia. Medieval mummers traveled from house to house performing religious plays during the Christmas season. Although many of the stories were based on biblical themes, their main purpose was to entertain. Because of their unique role, medieval jesters were not simply tolerated. They were genuinely valued. Their relationships with both the people of the towns and the members of the royal court were often friendly and built on mutual respect. Acting as skilled diplomats, they frequently became the voice of reason for monarchs who had been raised to believe they ruled by divine right and answered only to God. A single well-timed joke could calm an angry king and spare an innocent person from punishment, protecting both the victim and the ruler from the consequences of unchecked anger. Although a jester's words could be sharp and biting, They were usually rooted in genuine insight and compassion. More often than not, the fool stood with ordinary people rather than with the powerful, challenging kings, while earning the respect of both nobles and peasants. We upload new videos every week, so if you enjoy this content, be sure to subscribe. Cheers.